I was roped in to provide babysitters. So I was looking for people. So I invited her to come help at a marriage retreat, along with, I think, 5 or 6 other people. But somehow we both ended up being there at dinner time, and everyone thought it was a great idea for, and this is Valentine's Day also, to have us sitting at a table together, because we're still there at dinner, like for our dinner. So yes, that was an interesting,
candlelight,
probably
roses,
kind of awkward.
and people who have been married for 20 or 30 years all around us. So
she only shredded a couple napkins.
I only shredded a couple napkins. I was very nervous. And then the second time we spent any real time together was our son is actually named for Nathan's priest growing up, Father Damien. And Father Damien passed away, and he had been living in rural Pennsylvania. And so Nathan asked me if I could drive him up.
She had a car. I did not.
Drive him up to a funeral. So those were our 2 first dates, if you want to call them that. But as we went through, I ended up going to college at St. Vincent, and we spent quite a bit of time there together over the years. I actually, one of the questions that you guys had submitted ahead of time was, what did we consider religious life? And yeah, we sure did. I actually was in the process of applying to a Carmelite monastery, and I was all ready to join after my senior year of high school. I had already been accepted to the aspirancy there. But my family had some really difficult life circumstances come up. And my dad asked me if I would hold off on that and get started with college first. And then, if everything worked out, then I could leave. So when I met Nathan, I was all set to go join the Carmelites. And Nathan also very seriously discerned a religious life and the priesthood. And so that was.
She also drove me to retreat at what was it, Holy Name Province for the Franciscans. So yes.
Yeah, so that was always kind of in the background of our interactions, was that we were both definitely open to and strongly considering religious life. So a little bit about our growing up years, because I think your family really has a big influence on your vocational discernment. I'm a convert to Catholicism. I had come into the church a little bit before, I met Nathan. So I'd been Catholic for a while. And so I had, I think, a pretty good intellectual grasp on the teachings of the church. But I hadn't really grown up with the Catholic culture. And so in a lot of ways, discernment for me was fumbling around in the dark. And so there was a lot of struggle for me in our discernment of marriage and ruling out religious life for me personally. And I think part of that was just because I didn't grow up with, like you guys hopefully have familiarity with religious and with priests and with other Catholic families and married folks who are living out their vocation. So a lot of the cultural aspects of Catholicism were very foreign to me. And then you grow up.
Cradle Catholic, grew up in rural West Virginia where virtually no Catholics around. And the predominant view was Catholics aren't Christian. So dealing with all that growing up. So I was homeschooled for the first 7-8 years, and then going into the public school system where that's the predominant view. That only challenges your faith and makes you stronger, and you have to know it well.
Both of us had the advantage of having parents who were very much committed to their marriages. So in both of our families growing up, divorce was never on the table. It was never an option for our parents. And so that we had in common, even though we came from different faith backgrounds, was that marriage was something that was really valued and considered important and sacred. So like I mentioned, we did consider the possibility of priesthood and religious life, and that was very much an undertone in our discernment. I was 2 years behind Nathan in college, so in my junior year, he went off to get his master's degree at Marshall University, which was about 8 hours away.
Yeah, something like that. Oh no, it's more about 4.5. Is 8 from Erie.
Oh, right. Okay. I was like, who's driving? Yeah, 4.5 from St. Vincent. One of the really beautiful things about St. Vincent was that we were really immersed in all these different models of vocation. So we had the Benedictine monks there, and we were invited to participate in their liturgical life of the Liturgy of the Hours and their daily masses and all of that. There were a lot of families that were also involved in the college to some degree or another. They had a homeschooling program. So every Friday, all these homeschooling families would descend on St. Vincent College, and the education majors were getting their experience with classroom teaching with the homeschoolers. So that was neat to see. And then Nathan and I both ended up babysitting for the president of our college. They had 5 kids, and so we were part of their family life. And then not far away from St. Vincent, there was also a Benedictine community of sisters. And so we spent some time with them as well. Got to know the seminarians when they were in formation. Nathan took some seminary classes, and I did as well.
I play soccer with them pretty much every day outside. So.
And he played soccer with the seminarians. And so we just, I think, got to see in maybe a way that people don't normally, the very human side of religious and priests and seminarians and families as well. You know, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. One of the brothers I knew pretty well said, when you join the monastery, you have this idea of what monks are supposed to look like, or at least he did. And he said, just, you know, very quickly, living in community life, all of your flaws come to the surface and are on full display for everybody to see. And that's certainly true for family life as well.
So God's will, I got tasked with talking about God's will, because for me, the sense that, you know, there's only, so I don't agree with the whole, there's only one way that you are called to this and you have to do this, otherwise you're off with God's will. To me, it's always been, what did God give us? God gave us the Great Commandment, you know, love God above all things and love your neighbor as yourself, essentially. So with that, God's will isn't this XYZ, here is your plan. He didn't provide a plan. He provided, you know, what are we to do? The corporal works of mercy, the spiritual works of mercy. We're drawing from scripture here to look at what God's plan is. So to me, it has been, God's will is tied up in salvation history, that the best way we fit into God's overall plan is, one, us getting to heaven, but then also bringing everyone else that we possibly can. So how do we interact daily with everyone, and how do we make, you know, ourselves aligned to God? If you have a light source and everyone is pointing at that light source, no matter where you are, you're pointing to God, to God's will. So with that, whatever vocation that you choose, I mean, you have gifts given to you by God, and using those gifts makes everything easier with that. But you can make choices as long as you're oriented to God's will. I know for Elizabeth, that really took a lot of pressure off her, with the sense that there isn't this one thing that you have to do and you have to figure out what that one thing is. But your one thing is to know, love, and serve God and be happy with God in heaven. So why we were made by God.
Yeah, I think I know I certainly spent a lot of time spinning my wheels And I think that's a common experience for discerners, what is God's will for me in the grand scheme of things, rather than focusing in on what is God's will for me right now in the present moment. And so these are just some questions to ask yourself. And if you say yes to all of these, then great, guess what? You're living God's will for you right now. So am I in the state of grace? Yes or no? If no, get to confession. Are you being faithful to the duties and obligations of your current state in life? So, our duties and obligations have to do with our marriage and family life. You guys, you are your sons and daughters, your brothers and sisters, and your students. So are you being faithful to those obligations of your current state of life? And then do you have a lively prayer and sacramental life? And this one's really important because we need to have that lively prayer and sacramental life to be in God's will right now. But also, we need to have that relationship with God in order to be responsive to his direction moving forward in our life. And so this is a prayer that was given to me, I think, maybe my junior or senior year in college, when I was really very much struggling with the question of discernment. I went to confession with that, and the priest gave me this prayer that I've prayed ever since. Lord, free me of the burden of myself, that I may better do your will. And so that's been very helpful to me when I am faced, even still, discernment doesn't stop when you get married or you join religious life. There's still many, many things that we have to discern for our family. And so just asking the Lord to free me of the burden of myself, to free me from the anxiety and worry and perfectionism, so that I can serve him. And then a quote from Micah down at the bottom, God doesn't, it's not a secret what we need to do to be in his will. We're supposed to do justice, love goodness, walk humbly with God. And those things put us in the will of God. The second lesson from our discernment was that we honor God by pursuing goals and making decisions. And this is something that I think more I had to learn. You knew I had to learn that, like we said, God doesn't give you a 10-year plan or a 5-year plan or even a 5-minute plan. Usually, I was reflecting a little bit on the Annunciation. So Mary is invited to be the mother of God, and she says yes. And you'd think that the mother of God among all people would deserve to have some sort of, this is how it's going to work out kind of plan laid out for her, but that's not the case. If you get into the Gospel of Luke, Mary says her fiat, be it done unto me according to your will, and then the angel departs from her. There's no follow-up. There's no, this is how it's going to go, Mary, this is what it means to be the mother of God. The angel just departs from her. So she says her yes, and that's it. And so if the mother of God doesn't get a plan, most of us probably won't either. And
Joseph got the plan.
Joseph got the plan
when he was sleeping.
Just
gonna throw that out.
So just kind of being aware that wanting to have a certainty about vocation, or wanting to take control of our vocation, or wanting to have safety in knowing exactly how things are going to unfold, all of those things can become idols if you let them. And so God treats us as adults. He gave us the gift of our free will and our intellect, and we should use those things because they are God's gift to us. So a lot of times discernment and being in the will of God comes down to just doing the next right thing, making decisions, trusting that if you are of goodwill, if you are putting yourself at God's disposal, that he will work through the choices that you make. Third lesson from our discernment is that marriage is not the finish line. So a lot of times, I think, especially at Catholic colleges, people can think that they've got 4 years. They've got 4 years to find their spouse and get married. And I've heard some ladies talk about earning their Mrs. degree at college. They just really want to be engaged by their senior year of college. And so I want to say that is not the goal. The goal of our Christian life is not to get married or not to join a religious life. In fact, making your vows is the starting point in following God along a particular path. I was listening to a Franciscan friar talk about the day that he made his final vows. And so all his friends and family were coming up and congratulating him on making his final vows. And then one of the older friars came up and said, yeah, congratulations. I guess tomorrow we'll find out if you mean it. And it's kind of harsh, but also very true. We made our vows, we said, I do. And then the next day and the day after that and the day after that for the rest of our lives, that's when we find out, did we mean it? Did I mean the words that I said on our wedding day? Did I mean my vows?
Yeah. As a priest told us, one of the monks, you're marrying your cross. So every day is daily conversion. Guess what? You got the cross there. Normally right across from you.
Yeah, it's true. Very true.
Causing you penance.
Causing you penance. Daily conversion is one of the vows that the Benedictine monks take. And so that just means, the daily turning back to God. And so that's, very much what our marriage is. We have a crucifix in our room, and that's just a reminder that every day when we get to the end of the day, wow, we probably didn't live our vows as well as we could have. And we need to turn back and be converted and say yes again. So we have just a couple of points of advice for you guys in your discernment, and we're keeping an eye on the clock here and running short on time. So we offer the advice fully acknowledging that the longer we're married, the less we know about being married. And so the first is just to, right now, cultivate habits for wholeness and holiness. The Catechism talks about how virtue is habitual and firm. So it's a habit. It's not just something that you do kind of one-off. And so just cultivate those virtuous habits and make them part of your day-to-day life, and pray for the grace to be practicing the virtues of patience and fortitude and all of those things that will become so important in living out your vocation. In the resources for you guys is an examine for discerners. So take a look at that. It's a little bit more a relational examine. So your relationship with other people, what that looks like in your family life. Right. This one.
Just reading the words that are on the slide. So any which way. So often we frame, whether it's, for men, the sacrament of holy orders or marriage. There's also single, there's religious life. As I like to poke at some of the monk friends, that religious life isn't a sacrament, that marriage was, because they would poke back at us all the time with, they had 4 years of formation, and what did we have? I required 6 weeks or 6 months, and I get to poke back and I'm like, yeah, but we have the graces from the sacrament. So with that, taking up your cross, as we mentioned, we were told that you're marrying a cross. No matter what you choose, there's challenges along the way. So really looking at that, talking to people who are on the journey, looking at how they have new experiences and what there is. I had a monk tell me, overall, God wants you to be happy. So, what brings you joy, what gives you pause, you really can kind of find your way along with that. Life skills. So, as somebody told us early on, when you have a new kid, now you're a baby parent. When your kid grows to be a toddler, now you're a toddler parent. You grow in whatever you are. You pick up new skills, you add new tools to your tool bag. No matter what path you choose, you aren't somehow given all the answers to. You have to find them, you have to develop them. And people often ask, we have 5 kids, how do you do it? Well, you do it step by step, incrementally, and you learn how to handle all the additional chaos. And for us anyways, it's a lot easier with more kids because they can take care of each other, they can play with each other, they can fight with each other, and then have their best friend, and the next day they swap them and fight with another one and have another best friend. So it's not all roses, but overall they all love each other.
Yeah. Life skills, now's the time to learn those things that will serve you and serve others in whatever vocation God calls you to. So talking about really practical things, learn how to change a tire, learn how to balance a checkbook, learn how to bake a loaf of bread. Come join me in Culinary Science Club and I'll teach you how to bake a loaf of bread. All those things will make you the servant of your family if God calls you to marriage, to your community if God calls you to religious life, to your parish if God calls you to the priesthood. So those practical life skills, I think, are really an important thing to be picking up now.
Baking bread, really important. We used to help some of the monks bake bread, and we knew one that got completely fired because another monk from another monastery came and said, "This bread's horrible. We have a much better recipe. Oh, and I know how to bake bread." So even baking bread, no matter where you're at, knowing that skill.
When the monastery was selling their bread as a fundraiser, one of the monks would stand outside the parish hall and say, buy the bread because the monks won't eat it because it was so.
The monastery wasn't selling. Anyway, the Respect Life Club was being sponsored by the monastery. They made bread for them, and yes. But anyways, yeah, buy monk bread because the monks won't eat it.
So learn to bake bread. Could help your community out someday. The last thing is just to consider what you would be looking for in a future spouse. And you can get kind of in the weeds with this. I mean, some people will, come up with 100-point list of all the characteristics that they want to see in their spouse. And that's not what I'm talking about. When you are thinking about what you would look for in a future spouse, I'm talking about holiness, ultimately, because whoever you marry, you want to be married to somebody who is pursuing holiness, who will help you get to heaven. And Jesus talks about this a lot in the Gospels, the difference between somebody who has the appearance of holiness versus someone who is actually living holiness. And I think that's something to keep in mind. It's just everybody is flawed and imperfect, but as you consider entering into a relationship with somebody, as you consider starting to date, are they in their day-to-day life, are they making the effort, are they trying to be holy, are they trying to align themselves to God's will? I knew pretty early on, even though we weren't anywhere close to a romantic relationship at that point, I knew early on that Nathan would be a good spouse because he was and is the most generous person that I have ever met. He was profoundly generous and still is. And I also, just watching his interactions with kids, we did a lot of babysitting. And so seeing the way that he interacted with kids, I knew that he would be an excellent father if that's what God called us to. So just that kind of thing.
You want somebody who cares for you the way they care for themselves. You want that value to be one of reciprocal love and respect.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's something that you're not perfect at. It's something that you have to learn also. So being humble and being open to learn.
And the couple in the picture here, that would be the parents of Saint Therese, Zélie and Louis, who share a feast day. So hopefully someday we'll share a feast day as well. All right, we ran a little bit over time, but I want to just go ahead and take any questions that you guys have.
Hi, this is John Clare. I'm gonna go ahead and go through some of the questions that the students have been putting in the chat. So I'm not gonna take them in the exact order they came because I'm a little bit grouping them. So the first question that I wanted to present to you guys is, how do you know which person is the right one, if any, to marry? My fear is that in the future, I may end up marrying the wrong person and we would have a regrettable marriage.
Okay, so I don't fully hold with the whole idea that there's a soulmate, that there's somehow this one person you're supposed to marry, and no matter what, whoever else you're not going to be happy with. No. The way I look at it is the same way I approach doing God's will, is you're looking in marriage for somebody who is going to respect you and bring you close to heaven. As long as you're both committed and helping each other walk on that path, it's not going to be necessarily all roses. There's going to be challenges, but you are helping each other.
Yeah. I'd say that there is no fear in love, and also that God doesn't play games. So if you're doing those things in the day-to-day, you have that prayer life, you have a relationship with the Lord, you're following the duties of whatever your current state of life is, and you are just putting yourself at God's disposal, then in time he will make your vocation clear to you.
And it's something that we don't practice in our culture, matchmaking. In other cultures they do, and in other time periods, even Catholic cultures practiced it. And they had some very successful, very loving marriages. At first, it's something they grow in and develop over time. Just like anything that you invest in is going to have more meaning to you. So the more you invest in your spouse and your family and whatever vocation you choose, the more meaning that vocation has. If you start looking elsewhere and investing your time and your money outside of that, it will pull you away. That's where we have in the media all the time, oh yeah, we just grew apart. Well, that's because you weren't invested in, you weren't growing together. So really, it's growing together. I wouldn't be worried about having the idea of somehow having, this destined soulmate out there. You're looking for somebody who's going to help you become holy.
Great, yeah, great answer. I have another tough one. I'm going to send out the second question. How did you deal with the issue of submission to your husband in marriage? As a woman who very much likes to have my own way and make the decisions, this isn't exactly a thing I would look forward to if I got married.
So she's obedient to me, I die for her. So if you put it in that context of Christ and the church and Christ, what did Christ do? He died for the church. So it's a mutual respect thing. I mean, it really isn't. No one's a rug that the other person gets to stand on, or a pedestal that you get to stand on top of. You really have to respect each other. And early on, so she skipped all this. She was in med school when we got married. So she graduated college, went to med school. I didn't graduate. I completed my coursework for my thesis. We got married. I moved up to Erie. That's where Erie was. That 8-hour difference between where I went and where she went. Moved up there. I couldn't get a job with my career field. It was the height of the recession. She's in med school. Like, okay, we're going to make this work. So I ended up taking a job at Walmart. She got pregnant and made the determination with talking to the teachers there that, you only get to be a mom once, 5 times, any which way. With that, you can come back to, if she wants to go back to med school, and it was an option. So it was always an option, and it was up to her. I was willing to work at Walmart. I was actually doing very well. I was moving up extremely fast. Good work ethic, by the way, gets you a long way in anything you do. There's this saying in the military, you recruit for attitude, you can teach everything else. So you have a good attitude, you have strong work ethic, you can move along. Anyways, I'll let you.
Yeah, no, I think you have to be careful because there's some really bad theology out there relating to marriage, and especially the idea of submission and obedience. But if you get into what St. Paul actually wrote, he talks about being mutually submissive to each other out of respect for the Lord. And then, like Nathan said, wives, submit to your husband, but that's in the context of husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church. In other words, Christ died for the church. Okay. So every marriage is going to look different, but if you are married to somebody who loves you as Christ loves the church, then submission is really not a big deal. So throughout our marriage, we've had discernment of career and family life, and but it's never been, Nathan's not saying my role is law and you just have to be obedient to that. No, it's a mutually submitting ourselves together to the Lord, because we are one flesh. We are united in marriage, and so it's a mutual submission.
We'll try and take shorter time answering the next question.
No worries. And it's a simpler question. If someone is discerning a religious life, would you recommend going to college, spending some time after high school before joining?
Some religious life or some religious orders will require it, others discourage it. There are some communities out there, you want to know what you're going to, you want to make sure it feels right. Is there a right way and a wrong way to go about it? It's going to be every single person. If you've had good formation through high school and you're a competent individual who can live on your own, you'll be fine. If you're not able to, you need to develop those life skills.
Yeah, I would also just add at a very practical level, be careful about college debt if you're seriously considering religious life. I've known a couple of people who wanted to join a religious community and they had to wait for several years in order to pay off their college debt first. Most communities are not going to let you join with college debt. You have to pay that off in advance. So just at a practical level, be aware of that.
Very good. Another question, what are some struggles of married life? And this will probably be our last question, just to let you know, because we have about 2 more minutes before we'll wrap up and do prayer and end notes. But for last question, what are some struggles of married life? How can people discerning the married life prepare for these struggles?
Learn to die to yourself. I mean, there's going to be numerous challenges, numerous struggles. They're going to change every single day, whether they're learning to tame your own will or there's stumbling blocks placed by the devil. You're going to find challenges. You have to learn to die to yourself.
Yeah, and it's like we were talking about earlier, it's building up the habit of virtue so that when you are faced with those challenges, then you can respond from a place of virtue rather than a place of vice, and having that deep and rich prayer life and relationship with the Lord allows you to respond to the other person out of love instead of out of fear. I think that the challenges, probably the biggest challenges that we faced in our marriage have really had to do more with parenting. Each child comes with their own personality. They are their own person right from the get-go. And so we have to learn, how do I form this particular individual child? There's no cookie cutter model for parenting. And then I think the other big challenge in our marriage has just been when we made our vows on our wedding day, we vowed that we would be open to children, to lovingly receive children as a gift from the Lord. And we have lost several children to miscarriage, and we lost them in a very short period of time. And that was very difficult. That was a big challenge for us to realize that lovingly accepting children as a gift from the Lord, we aren't in control of how long those lives will be with us. But I think every challenge, every cross that we've had in our marriage has been fruitful. The little ones that we lost, we experienced their intercession. And I know from talking to my students that many of you also have brothers and sisters in heaven, and you experience their intercession as well. So I'd say that the grace is always there. From the very first day that we were married, I was just overwhelmed by the grace that is available to us. And so whatever the challenge is, whatever the cross is, the grace is there for that particular moment, that obstacle, that challenge, whatever it is. we just have to ask God for it. We have to avail ourselves to the grace that he's so willing to give to us in this sacrament.
Wonderful. Thank you guys so much. This has been just superb. As we wrap, would you be willing to close us out in prayer, and then I'll do the end notes for everyone.
Yeah, for sure.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen. Lord, bless this time we've had together. Help it sow seeds of curiosity. Let them grow, blossom, and yield 100-fold. Help each one of us walk humbly with you. Help us to guide ourselves to your will, and help us along this journey. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much.